Welcome everybody to another episode of Our Roots and Tea. And we are back to discuss more of very existential life topics, talking about spiritual journey, mental well-being, healing, life purpose, psychology, meditation, all that kind of good stuff. And I always have a guest with me, and then these guests are usually all types of people from all over the world. They all have different backgrounds, so it's a joy to talk to these type of people with all their life experiences. And before I even begin to with our guest here, which is another good friend of mine, it is a tradition that we drink a tea while we have a conversation. Today's tea is Country Peach Passion Herbal Tea, caffeine free, for those who are sensitive to caffeine. And so we have my guest here is a good friend of mine, Victor. He is a production sound mixer, sound designer, among all the other talents that he has. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming on board.
Thank you, Darren.
Yeah, and so I want to dive kind of right into the conversation because Victor and I were just talking about a little bit earlier. With all the stuff going on right now, I guess I just want to know, kind of throughout this whole year, how have you been dealing with the stress and anxiety? And then, if you have like certain ways or certain things that you do to manage it.
Uh, um, I'll be honest, I don't know if I'm a very good person to ask in terms of like stress management there. Um, Largely just because I feel like I think the general consensus or the general feeling kind of felt is like, there is like a general feeling of just stress and being overwhelmed with just the way things are, and then just finding whatever little things you can to kind of like get by, just do whatever you can to kind of just like, go about your day as best as you possibly can with as little stress as you can. For me, that's been a lot of because I worked in movies for so much, I like watching a lot of movies. I've been trying to use a lot of this time or a lot of free time at home to catch up on a large backlog of movies I just missed within the last couple of years. Um, Also do a lot of reading.
Mm,
Reading and books were kind of like my very first big passion before I even got into filmmaking. My work that I'm doing right now actually is I'm an elementary school librarian,
mm,
and for work I've been working remotely on our school's catalog of just like books, basically to kind of like stuff that we need to refresh and restock in our inventory and all of that. So um, that's actually the line of work I'm looking at getting into. Pretty rec- uh Pretty recently actually, like I've decided that I kind of want to become a full-fledged librarian, so that's where I'm at, and that's kind of where I'm getting into for all of that, and you know studying up on that and doing all of that, and
mhm.
just getting into the state of just reading books and doing stuff like that a little bit more. It's nice, it's good to just sit down and just read a book for a little while and let the world
Mm.
that an author puts into your head kind of like take you away from wherever you're at for a moment. So if just staring at a screen is something that's not something you want to keep doing consistently for day after day, please pick up a good book and just, read for a little while. Hopefully that helps, at least on
Mm,
the eyes.
okay, that's cool. Like, what are you reading right now?
So I actually bought a couple of new books from Barnes and Noble, just
Cool.
books I kind of want to get for a little while. So
Yeah.
this is one that I'm starting right now.
Yes.
Mark Manson's Everything
Yes.
is Fucked, a book about
Yes.
hope.
Yes.
Yes.
I finished reading that last year actually.
Yeah, I just got started on it right now and I'm liking it so far. I don't know, because the thing is, it's like I've always been very skeptical and wary of like books that kind of have like, like this like
Mhm,
secret to life and to understanding and
mhm,
going well, like these like self-help books. But just the title alone of that and everything else, it's like that sounds like a book that I can finally get into it and understand that a little bit. Like I think I think a good portion, at least for me, like with kind of like coping and getting through like the stresses of the world is just recognizing and admitting that there are a lot of stresses and a lot of terrible stuff going on in the world, and
Yeah.
just finding ways to reconcile with that and then make peace with that, so you can
Uh-huh.
actually try to go about your life in a very hopeful, positive way. So
Have you actually read his previous book, which is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck? That one to me was what really got me started on this kind of journey I'm on right now.
that's interesting. Like, no, like I heard about that book, um, and I just never got around to reading it. But then when I came around to like, because again, like I wanted to get into like book reading and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
just again, like I saw the title of it, and I just like, given kind of like what I understand about like the author, like not having read any of the books or whatever, it's like
Mhm.
it definitely seems like the kind of reading material I could definitely get into, especially like right now in these times where it's like, yeah, everything it really isn't that great, but we
Yeah,
can still find a way to make this work. So yeah,
it's true.
that's
Yeah. If you have a chance, though, you should also pick up his previous book too, because his previous one is the title is just as good, and it's also another fun read because very similar to the one that you just showed me. Everything is fucked. It um I mean, I don't know what you think about it, but for me, I think the stuff he talks about, or the advice that he gives, it's like it feels very real and genuine in a way where, like, it's not really sugarcoating anything. It's just being
yes,
honest, like, hey, life does suck, and that's kind of how you have to look at it, you know?
exactly. And I think part of like, again, like what I said earlier, it's like part of the issue that I've always had with like books like this, or like stuff like this in general. It's like like they kind of mush over, code over like a lot of that, and it's like I think just the glaring honesty and just the ability to be that grounded and just very upfront with
Mhm.
that, and then kind of get into what you really need, which is like, a reason to care and a reason to hope and a reason to just be okay with not giving a fuck.
Yeah,
Uh, it's like, yeah, that's I think definitely something that I feels, at least to me, a lot more productive and a lot more just better for you as a person. I think it's when you can, you know, be real and be honest and confront those things that are not very great to be confronted with and to be honest about, and then come to terms with that, because part of, I think, really getting by and facing a lot of issues in life is just to admit to and accept the glaring realities behind them, and then learning how to kind of cope and reconcile with those as best as you can. So
that's true. That's true. So let me ask you this then. Have you, because I don't know, did you finish the book, first of all, that book?
I haven't yet. Like I just started this week. I bought it a little while earlier, but like I just barely started getting into it right
Yeah,
now.
it's okay.
But already, like it just feels like, again, like there's an honesty about it that I think is very important, something that I appreciate, because it's like, yeah, it's when things like this happen, like, or when hard stuff like in the world kind of happens or whatever, it's
Yeah,
like, it's important to kind of like not shy away from it, or Coda. Like, you have to take it for what that is, and then be able to kind of like
right.
be able to accept that. And
Mhm.
especially with everything that's been going on recently, like with everything going on in the world right now, like
Yeah.
it's something that I think is definitely very helpful, and something that I definitely do want to incorporate more of into my life. So yeah.
So before that book, though, it kind of does sound like that. You never really haven't ever actually really read any other self help books before, right? Or
No,
okay.
because again, I didn't really see a lot of the point of like I tried to read or get into like passages. Like, I'm one of those people where, like, I read a book, if it doesn't capture me or it doesn't fill me with some sense of enthusiasm or interest within the first couple of pages, I know I'm not going to like it, so I'm going to stop.
Mm,
I can't be bothered to read books that like don't engage me in some way or form, or that don't kind of like address something that comes to me. Like, one of the hardest book reading experiences I ever had was reading A Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, because
uh,
it's like it's a very long book, and it has like a lot of like themes and elements in it that are very hard to get into.
mhm.
But for the most part, story wise, it's just a very long, slow burn, and it's only until you get towards like the last couple of chapters of the book where it really starts to pick up. So that was hard to get through. The sequel, so much better. Like right away, like the whole story starts off with like a bang twist, and then like it just gets into just like this like buildup or whatever. And it's like, stories like that or books like that were like, because I know a lot of people, like especially like in this day and age, like reading is such a very novel and
Yeah.
rare concept for a lot of people, just like being able to do that. So I think it's like if you can find a book that can capture your interest or your attention within the first couple of pages, it's going to be a good one. And thankfully, so far, this book is one of those good ones
Mm,
that I'm very excited about because unlike the other self-help books where I try to get into it or whatever,
mhm.
this one from the very beginning lets you know that there's going to be some seriously uncomfortable things that you're going to have to be okay with hearing and be okay with understanding for yourself.
Mhm.
So, and that's just, I think it speaks to just like my own kind of like worldview and just my own kind of like idea behind things. It's like you can only go so far in your life before you address certain issues or certain problems or
Yeah.
obstacles that are in your way or that are right in front of you. You
Yeah.
have to be able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable
Yeah.
and facing that. And then once you can do that, then you can actually go about solving these issues in front of you or figuring out how to get by with them, you know, as best as you can.
Okay, so to kind of tag on to that then, I mean, I guess lately what are you uncomfortable with? And then how are you tackling whatever you're uncomfortable with?
So, well, I know at some point we're probably going to discuss it.
Yes, we are. We could even start right now too, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I think some pretext before that because this
Yes.
something that happened a little bit before that as well too. And again, it goes right into it because it basically like you have to understand, especially with like with this particular topic, it's not just one issue or one
Yeah.
problem or cause or discussion. It's an envelope of different issues that are
Yeah.
being combined, and this is the horrible result of a lot of those issues that have
Yes.
gone unaddressed and unresolved.
Yes.
So some context before that. I think before the awful thing that happened in Georgia
Yeah.
this past week,
Mhm.
even before that, there was like this ongoing buzz on the internet where women were talking about like their experiences and their you know horrible traumas that they've gone through in terms of like sexual assault, harassment,
Mhm.
violence against like from men, and just the problems with like using hashtags that say like not all men and
Yeah.
guys that perpetuate that and perpetuate those claims and those
Yeah.
ideas. And it got personal for me because what happened was on Facebook I posted up basically just like one of those things that you kind of like a post that you see on your feed and then you share it like
Yeah.
basically saying how like like it's how problematic it is for like guys to just like not address or not understand like the weight of that. And then of course a colleague from college comes in
Mhm.
and it just reinforces the same issue that this thing is talking about. Basically just the fact that like how it's harmful against men to make this like huge overgeneralization about like like just all this or whatever. And it's like, my dude, you literally came in here and the whole point just washed right over you. Just
Mm.
ugh. Because again, like the issue is not the fact that it is all men or anything like that. The fact of the issue is that it is enough men that women as a whole feel uncomfortable around all men because
Mhm.
they live in this constant state of anxiety and terror in
Mhm.
regards to any possible negative interaction they may possibly have with a man
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the very possible dangerous outcomes that could come of that.
Yes.
It's a reality that women have that we should not be in debate about or agree to disagree about, especially as a man
Yes.
who are the people that are instigating and are the source of this world of anxiety and terror that
Mhm.
we have put these women in.
Mhm.
Um, and it went into a very long, very frustrating conversation, both on the actual post on Facebook, like publicly. We got into it into my DMs a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Finally, another friend of mine who works in film, she came on and kind of addressed I think in a very more simple, nuanced way, kind of just like the issues that like I was already kind of like trying to tell this guy. And it was that, and then also kind of like the just responses I think from like the other women that kind of like interacted with or also said something on there where it's sort of like he finally kind of started to understand what the actual issue was. I hope he started to understand what the actual issue was, because after that he let it go,
Mm,
didn't have to worry about it. And honest to God, I thought that was going to be the only stressful thing I would have to worry about. And then Tuesday night,
yeah.
oh God.
It was pretty terrible. Like, no, I hear you, man. I mean, that's part of the reason why I kind of want to talk about this today too, because it kind of bothered me a little bit, after it happened, for actually this whole past week.
Hmm.
And that's why I was gonna see what your thoughts are on this,
Yeah.
on what happened, like, in the shooting in Georgia.
Yeah, well, let me start off right off the bat, guys, by telling you that I am a cis hetero white passing first generation Latino male. So my opinions and views on this should not be a strong reflection of anything else. You should definitely also be listening to a lot of other voices on this matter, especially a lot of not API women voices on this,
Of course,
because those are the ones that we need to amplify that most.
of course.
Yes. Having said that, like it's I grew up basically like with a lot of friends like in middle school and high school that were from the API community. Like a large majority of my friends were of varying Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese
Yes.
descent. My very best and longest friend growing up since childhood is half Japanese on his mother's side. So, while I am actively against every form of bigotry, xenophobia, and misogyny out there, it was, you know, when I heard about what happened, like in Georgia to these women in Atlanta, like it definitely, like because of that personal kinship I feel with the API community as a result of like like my past
Yeah.
experiences, like it felt that much more personal, and then as a result, it made me feel that much more saddened by and just enraged by to kind of just read about and just
Yeah.
listen to all the stuff that came in afterward, like just
Oh
people
yeah.
trying to find ways to humanize what this guy did and all
Hmm.
that. And it's
Hmm.
really just again kind of just a giant culmination of like a lot of major giant issues that have just gone
Yeah.
on even past this pandemic, just
Yeah.
that have been there and resulted in just this horrible atrocity that happened. So
Yeah. And then because I read a little bit more in the news too, and then part of it too is also the police chief, like his response to this whole event.
yeah. Oh God.
It's just so it just sounds so amateurish, and it's like, dude, you are a law enforcer, you are giving an interview, like, like a press, and all you have to say is like, oh, it was a having a bad day or whatever. I'm like, what?
And
It's
again, it's like one of those other things where it's like whenever stuff like this happens, like, and it's always like a angry white guy that is
yeah.
the source of like these like horrible, atrocious actions that occur. Like, it's never labeled as a terroristic action. It's always labeled as like an issue of this guy was mentally ill. This guy like had some serious issues. Like, mental illness only ever becomes a serious issue of discussion and topic whenever it applies to these people, because outside of that,
Yes.
everyone else is criminalized, everyone else is weaponized into being like this horrible, terrible person and demonized in some way or form.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
No, I
And
know it absolutely is. I agree with you, and that's why it's so it's kind of like it is very heartbreaking to see that that's kind of how it has become. Well, I mean, we all know that it's been like this for a while, obviously,
yeah,
for many years, not just recently, but it's become more and more of a problem, because it's like, because I see like a lot of people's responses on Twitter and social media, and they're just kind of saying like, the way how America is, like, they kind of always brush shootings or these kind of killings off like, oh, it's just like another day in the office. That's what happens in America. I just don't understand why people have that kind of psychology, right? That thought process, because any other country seeing us, they're like, dude, this is not normal. We always have all these shootings and nothing has ever been resolved, and we have these
And
killings. It's,
yeah, and it's like it's even worse too because like like at this point it's sort of like no one outside of like this country is ever shocked or appalled at anything that happens here anymore because it's become so
yes,
recurring and so much something that like we kind of come to expect. Like even just like no when the cop came out and like said those things, like as horrible and as terrible as it is, like it was also one of those things too where it's sort of like you can't really be surprised by the fact that he took on that stance because it's like that's also become something that's become so recurring and expected at this point. It's just the lack of a genuine response to this or a lack of like general, disgust from authority and the people that we elect to take care of us and watch over us, to it's a sense of criminal apathy on their part when it happens, and it's horrible.
yeah, no, it is. I agree with you, and I mean, and yeah, and then of course, going to your point about like, yeah, mental illness only really applies to, hey, we'll say as it is, it only applies to white people, Caucasians.
White
That's just
guys, yeah.
white guys. That's just as really straightforward and as obvious as it sounds, and it's true because whenever like other, like what you said, like other races, like what other minorities, when they do this, they're like, oh, this guy's probably a terrorist or whatever, and you're just like, and then of course people who are usually saying this are obviously other white guys or because they're protecting their own people. They're, to them in America, they're the superior race, or things like that.
Hmm.
And that's why this matter really bothers me so much too, because I mean, because because you mentioned your first generations. That means you've been here for like obviously years and years. I mean, you're basically born and raised here, as my guess, right?
Yeah, like
So
my parents came here when both my parents and their families came here when they were like young, but I was born and raised here, so it was like, you know, I've always kind of had like this sense of understanding, like of just like kind of like where I'm at, and also like the kind of like spaces we kind of occupy. Mostly just because ever since I was little, I've always been fascinated with just kind of like exploring and seeing the world like just kind of as like a whole, and then kind of like looking into that. And it sucks because as you get older, you really start to understand and become more conscientious of just how a lot of these issues that come up, like like especially like regarding racism and
yeah,
misogyny and violence, like it's like it would be nice if this was all chalked up to just like flaws in individual character and stuff like that. But no, these are systemic issues because they've become so accepted and tolerated. They've been
yes,
given enough space to grow that like it's just become so ingrained into the culture. And I think, when I said earlier, like it's a combination of a lot of these issues, it really is like, it's a combination of how or white society sees and views minorities, Asians, and Pacific Islanders in this
yes,
country.
yes,
It is a combination of how we regard women as and how we sexualize them, especially like Asian women, how they are fetishized and sexualized.
yes,
I've been reluctant to share articles that apply the status of sex worker onto these women, mostly just because there hasn't been any there hasn't been anything definite to say that they are, and
hmm,
I don't want to risk perpetuating,
sure,
as a friend pointed out earlier, risk perpetuating like other harmful stereotypes
yeah,
regarding Asian women that
yeah,
work in these places and the services that they perform.
yeah,
But again, that also plays into this as well too,
yes,
because again, it's like the perceptions that we have of sex work and the people that go into this, in addition to how society regards them
yeah,
or disregards them completely in these
yeah,
situations, as well as also just Asian women in that regard, and kind of like the stereotypes that come with that.
yeah.
It's a gigantic combination of all these issues, and it's
It's totally fucked.
It is. It's absolutely fucked, and it's horrible too because it's like the backlash and the racist vitriol that comes with that. You know, it's obviously it's because there's still this gigantic discomfort with trying to recognize that reality for so many people,
Yeah.
or try to come to terms with that and accept responsibility for the roles that we that guys play into that as well too. Like again,
Yes.
one of the issues that I had with like my friend earlier, which I think still applies to this, is like guys don't want to confront or recognize the role that we play directly or indirectly in
Yes.
this, because
Yes.
regardless of whether or not we're the ones that instigate or commit these acts of violence or terror
Yeah.
against women or against
Yeah.
minorities of any color,
Yeah.
the quote unquote good guys that don't do that don't say anything or don't become active enough bystanders to call that out or to say anything to defend that. And it's like the reason why this continues to persist is because it's a matter of both this willful act of violence and anger that these people have, but also our also inability to confront that and to call that out. It's a combination of both action and both inaction on male parts in terms of like
Yes.
what we have done to kind of like address this issue like in the ways that we should.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do agree because because I obviously thought about this a lot to myself when it happened. Like, I realized much like what you said, it's really the kind of for us, like, as an Asian American, we're sometimes adding fuel into the fire, right? Because even for me, like growing up as a, because I obviously born and raised here in US as well, so I'm also American citizen, we're both are. And so growing up as a kid, you at least for me, you try to do things to fit in, right? So then
Mm,
you kind of add into that whole thing of like, oh, the stereotype stuff, and you sort of try to like laugh it off, either that or try to be someone that you're not, right? Because you're maybe afraid that you either like stand out too much, or you know how it is when you're a kid, you want to
yeah,
be
yeah.
the popular one or whatever.
Hmm.
And I realized that not just when I was a little kid, like even when I went to college, it was kind of like that too. I realized I was doing these things, or showing these actions that is almost like, dude, I'm Asian American, I'm Asian, I'm straight up Chinese, I should be proud of it. It's like, okay, Chinese food is great, I love it, boba milk tea, fuck all that Asian stuff, I should be
Yeah.
all in for, right? But then I wasn't doing that at the time, and then it sort of clicked in my head, like, wow, I'm basically almost encouraging these other people to be okay with it,
Yeah. It's like it's become like just so ingrained within us that like we don't even realize that it's happening. Like I was on this podcast with a friend a little while ago. We were discussing movies, talking about Godzilla King of the Monsters,
Okay.
because I'm a huge Godzilla fan, and we were talking
Yeah.
about the franchise that are coming out, right?
Yeah.
And I was talking about like as much as I'm a fan of the movie and like just the giant monster fights because I love giant monsters and that's kind of my whole spiel. It doesn't negate a lot of issues with the film that like not only now that I look at it, it's like it's not even the fact that they're just like terribly written plot points. Some of them are just straight up just horrible and terrible, like terribly offensive. Like there's like this part in the movie where basically like Ken Watanabe's character has this very long, passionate, heart to
Mm.
heart speech with Kyle Chandler's character, like talking
Mhm.
about like how in times of crisis, this is a moment where we learn to accept and move
Yeah.
on and to become emboldened by these things that confront us in life or
Yeah.
whatever. And then Kyle Chandler's character's like, "Did you come up with that?" Is like, "No, I read it in a fortune cookie, a very large fortune cookie." It's like, oh my god, like I was like, and my friend Tyler kind of pointed it out. It's like that was like, I mean, it's definitely racist and it's definitely unfunny, and it's like it just you don't realize how much it like
Yeah.
how awful it is until like you reflect on it later. And it's like the worst part about it is I think when I first watched the movie, I didn't even pay attention to just how bad that actually
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
because of how ingrained that kind of stuff is to us
Mm.
now. Like it's just like even like just like a terrible joke like that or whatever, it's like like you would otherwise chalk it off as like corny or just like ridiculous or whatever, but
Yeah.
like especially with like everything else, it's like you contextualize that and it's like it's actually pretty fucked up, and we're supposed to be okay with that because what Kim Watanabe said it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like and I feel like that's like something that like Hollywood has constantly like kind of done stuff like that where like they reinforce a lot of these like stereotypes, both very blatantly but also very subtly without us realizing it. And I think that's part of the reason why like when this stuff like happens, it's like, while for so many of us like it's not a mystery to a lot of us, for a lot of other people it's genuine shock because they have no idea where it came from, because it has been that embedded into us at this
Mm.
point, like the way that we have portrayed Asian and Asian Americans like in media, like just like
Oh yeah.
all of those stereotypes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, yes, media has a huge part in that, and they're not doing anyone favors. And to be quite honest, if they have to keep spilling out these kind of stereotype jokes, then that means that they don't really have a lot of talented writers or talented comedians. Then if they have to
Yeah,
tell jokes like
exactly.
that, it's like what? I mean, it's not like the whole like that, like what you just said about the whole fortune cookie thing. It's not even. It's such an unnecessary joke. I don't even understand
It's
why.
so poorly placed, and it's like it's just so awkward in time. It's like you're gonna have something this poignant and this awesome, and then you set
Yeah.
it off with like this very terrible attempt at a racist joke that is not even funny or just ugh.
Well, I
And
mean, to maybe to other people it might be funny, but obviously for most, at least like the Asian.
yeah, but again, again, that I think is still a part of the problem as well too, because it's like, you know, like even if it's like you chuckle at it or whatever, you kind of have to understand like why you're chuckling at it or why it's
Uh,
humorous, and then it's like,
true.
yeah, it's just like this cycle of just like awfulness. Like the more and more you think about it, like
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No.
uh, yeah, I was I went back and reread the Variety article you shared with me a while back, basically kind of like just how Hollywood has kind of become
Yeah. Yeah.
very complacent with a lot of like this, and how it's kind of like helped attribute to a lot of this as well too, like in terms like the kinds of jokes and a lot of the behaviors and stuff like that that we add or instigate to our media. One of the things that was in that article that it talked about was just how there's that one SNL performer that got
Mm.
fired because of like racist jokes they made regarding Asians like earlier on in their career, and just the half-assed apology that he tried to come with afterward, basically saying like, yeah, I mean, I said all those things, but at the end of the day, I'm a comedian and I'm supposed to be pushing boundaries. It's like, are you really though? Like, is that like, I mean, first of all, if like you said, you know, if you have to rely on those kinds of like dated, terrible
Yeah.
jokes that really aren't that funny to begin with, like,
Yeah.
are you really that much a comedian? Like, are you really pushing boundaries there? Are you just like, I don't know, you're trying to justify something very
Right.
terrible about yourself in that regard. Just
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Absolutely. And I know that's the problem. Is like they do it, and then like their way is just like half-ass apologies, right? And yeah, and then that article really, for those who are listening, I will post that article too in the description. But yeah, I mean that article, it really hits the nail, right? Because the way how they portray, obviously, Asian women in there, how like the whole like, like what you said, the Asian sex workers, like the whole like, oh,
Oh yeah.
yeah, like, oh, they're only there to please like the white people, because I guess you can say the white boss, and then they're saying stupid stuff like, oh, me love you a long time, like those
Yeah, Full
those
Metal Jacket and that
yeah,
terrible
yeah. The very
mess.
the very like stereotypical like stuff that a lot of people think that Asian women will say, which is not true, and they have to do it in a way where like they have to say those words in like an like what, like a Chinese accent. And I'm just then for me it's like, it blows my mind that it's like, what? I mean, I mean, a lot of Asian women don't even talk that way. They talk normally. It's just
I mean, yeah, I mean, granted, we're in the States, and obviously, like most of the women that we know are like were born here, so they definitely don't have those accents. But it's
sure.
like, even then, it's like
Yeah.
if that's your only real like, you know, introduction, if that's your only real outlet or kind of like just like source to kind of like how Asian women actually are, like Jesus Christ, no fucking wonder like we have like just these horrible like just stereotypes that keep perpetuating, because we have Hollywood has done such a disservice, like in regards to portraying all women and all persons of color, but especially in this instance, Asian women, in
Yeah.
media as anything past whatever we fetishized or stereotyped them to be already, and it's awful. And it definitely does, I think, have a role to play in a lot of what ended up happening in Atlanta, because a lot of these attitudes and these
Yeah.
stereotypes, they don't come from nowhere. Like people don't just have these ingrained in them. Like these are reinforced,
Yes.
like almost conditionally to us, like as we continue to get old, as we grow older, as we go
Yeah.
out and do all these things. It's like the stuff that we take in and that we consume become a part of our mindset and our worldview. So it's like if you're not conscious and aware of where that comes from or
Yeah.
what it is that they're saying, it's like you're going to get a lot of
Yeah.
people with a lot of like shitty worldviews because of stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, part of it too, though. I also think that is the fact that a lot of uh, well, I don't want to make this generalization, but there could be a handful of people that they're not really educating themselves on this matter, right? Because
Yeah.
um, the things with the whole racism against Asians, they need to learn a little bit of the history of that too. And I mean, obviously dates back all the way to like the Exclusion Act. I mean, that's something that a lot of people tends to forget, like that kind
Hmm.
that that matter, right? Because I guess at the time maybe that part of history isn't as prominent or whatever, but that happened, and then a lot of people maybe don't know too much about it, and then because what my friend pointed out yesterday to me is that like people still believe in the whole what they called model minority. I don't know if you heard of
Yeah.
that term. And so he was saying that that's all a myth. It's not true because it's just like what you said, it's the way how they reinforced it and ingrained in our heads. That's how it is. And so that's part of the problem is people aren't really, they're just not learning enough, or whether it's reading enough books or even learning the right subject matters to understand like, okay, this comes to a breaking point now because of all the stuff history wise that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, yeah, you're hoping that as people get older, as they acquire more knowledge, as they either read more or obtain more life experiences, they would learn this stuff. But then it seems like that's not the case. It seems like a lot of people are still not fully, fully there. I don't know if that's the right term to say.
I think it's a combination of just the fact that like no one ever wants to feel wrong or feel like they've wronged somebody. Like no one ever wants to be the source of or the reason behind someone's trauma or the reason why they've gone through a horrible experience. And I think that's kind of like something that it is will be an important it plays an important part in this, because I think part of I think accepting and being able to kind of like learn past these problematic behaviors is
Yeah.
being able to reconcile with and address those problems with yourself. Like like you mentioned, the whole model minority myth, that is so ingrained in so many people. I fucking believed that for the longest time growing up. That was something
Yeah.
I had to unlearn for myself, because
Yeah.
you grow up as a minority among minorities, because again, I grew up in a predominantly API
Yeah.
community. There were not a lot of Latinos where I was at, and I felt so kind of removed from my own culture already enough as it is, that like there's like it feeds a lot on that, because of like those experiences that you have, and you have to actively unlearn a lot of those issues
Yes.
and a lot of that problems, because you realize that it's not even perpetuated by agents or anything like that. Like again, this is just something that has been set up and established by white people to
Yes.
kind of like distance and further disenfranchise other minority groups against each other.
Yes.
And it's awful, because it's like it reinforces a harmful stereotype to other like minorities and other POCs that buy into it. And then a lot of like API individuals themselves start to buy into it as well too, because they have create these like cultures and drives for success for themselves or whatever, or feel like a failure for not living up to this expectation that has come with this minority like myth that we've just
Yeah.
popularized and kind of made so
Yeah.
ubiquitous. It's terrible.
Absolutely terrible. I mean, and I agree with you 100% that I'm much like you too. I believe in that for a long time too until I have to like really like what you said, really unlearn and think about and reflect like, oh, wow, there is an issue there. Like, even something like very simple, like let me give you an example. Something simple example is that I used to love watching Family Guy. Um, you know, but the thing is that what I start to realize is that there are so many episodes of Family Guy, the jokes are just so racist. It's so racist to the point where like for me at the time when I'm watching it, I don't think of it as big deal. I kind of laugh at the joke too. And but then as you get older, then you start to think about it. You're like, why did I even laugh about that? It's just kind of like a really stupid joke. And I think that's the part, the process of us unlearning, right? And then trying to kind of in some sense, you could say recalibrate our brains or whatever it is,
Yeah.
or infuse it with new knowledge. And that's kind of what I try to do, at least the past couple of years, because it's just very harmful, for that, that kind of stuff. At least
Yeah,
watching that
like
kind of stuff.
it's because like again, it reinforces harmful stereotypes about, like other people that you know and other people that you kind of like as you get older and as you collect more life experiences, you meet more people. Like a lot of these horrible, terrible stereotypes that have been reinforced into your head, you have to unlearn those before you start applying them to the people that you meet. But then also on top of that, like it's self-destructive on, the individual as well too, because then you go on this entire life living in and believing in these
Yes.
terrible bullshit lies and fallacies that you just keep reinforcing for yourself. And it's like, again, when you finally get confronted with it and you finally like it just becomes that much harder for a lot of people because again, this is something that they've known since forever. There was never anything wrong with that before. So how can it be wrong now? And people think
Mm,
that's I think where people suddenly get very defensive and start trying to make excuses for a lot of that. And that's not what we need to do right now. What we need to do is admit that the things that we laughed at, the things that we believed in were
yes.
wrong and harmful, and then actively unlearn all of that so we can learn better things to incorporate into our lives instead. So
Okay, so from your point of view, I mean, what are some ways that people can, I guess you could say, I mean, maybe we have talked about this earlier or covered it, but I mean, for you, from your point of view, are there ways for them to unlearn and then be able to apply to the right things? I mean, it's a big
it's
project, obviously. I just don't know what to do, to be honest.
it is, and I think like well, I kind of already like I feel like I've said this a couple of times where it's sort of like like part of what it is being comfortable with being uncomfortable with confronting certain things about yourself and the role you kind of play in a lot of this. And if you're a guy, uh, own up to and accept the fact that misogyny and just violence against women is to make not to use the word lightly a pandemic that like continues to keep going on because we don't really call it out or actively address it. For anyone that isn't of the non-API community, we have to accept and confront the fact that we have lived with and have either directly or indirectly perpetuated stereotypes we've made or assumed of, API individuals. And like as a result of that, we have to learn and unlearn a lot of stuff in order to do that. Like I think if we're ever going to people that constantly like talk about, the road to self-improvement or the road
Yeah.
to becoming a better individual, like
Yeah.
it's a lot of these like empty platitudes of like the self and stuff like that. But it's like I think for me, a large part of it is also just, yourself in regard to the rest of the world as well too. And when you do that, that means confronting and recognizing a lot of like very uncomfortable, very terrible and horrifying realities with the world
Hmm.
and knowing and understanding your role or your place in the scheme of all that. Because I think that's the only way I think anyone can ever actually like become a better individual or become a better person is once they understand or have a better self-awareness of that and the space they may occupy in that. Especially with all of this that's going on, first do the work of reaching out to your friends and to your family to see how they're doing,
That's great.
uh, learn and unlearn so many new things that you have neglected to learn before, like just histories, cultural histories for all APIs and API dysphoria, like just in terms of like not only just the stuff that's happened here in this country, but also other traumatic events that have happened in like their culture's histories, like just across the globe, uh, and how that has become a part of like just who they are as people now, because history is always something that affects us in the
Yeah.
present, regardless of wherever we are in that. And then also just again, doing the active work of like just continuing to remind yourself of all of those things and where you're at, and finding ways to become, if not part of the solution, then not become anything else that adds on to this problem at the very least, you know?
Right. No, that's very no, very is very well said, very well put, and it's important. And if everyone thinks like you, we'd have a lot of peace in this world. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't thinking like that. But it is very well said. And I guess to sort of wrap that up with this last question I have is that, the reason why I'm asking this question is because for me, with all this stuff going on, like I've had some confusion on where I stand being here in this, I guess you could say, in this country, or even in this society. So my question to you is the same as, like, what do you feel like your purpose is now, and then where you stand in this particular situation?
It's a very big question. It's
Well, it's a necessary question.
it is a very necessary question. And I think it's a question that a lot of us need to keep asking ourselves, especially now. I think right now, yeah, the best place I can possibly be, and something I should be doing more of, is doing whatever I can to amplify the voices of those that need to be heard more, especially now. API people, API women specifically, sex workers that feel that have a very personal stake in a lot of this, because a lot of the violence that happened was in fact a large part of that. It has to do with a lot of our own societal attitudes again towards sex workers and you know what they do. Yeah, just being able to kind of like find a way to stand aside and amplify those voices, and also share, I think, and find ways to develop empathy with and share, you know, feelings of just anger and disappointment, but also like a need for people to get come together as people because of it. I think it's one of those other things where it's like, especially because of everything that's gone on over the past couple of years regarding like not even just the API community, but regarding Black Lives Matter, immigrant rights, LGBTQ trans rights. It's like we need to be willing to not have to validate the traumas or the struggles that other people go through in order to accept and understand that no one should have to struggle or go through any of these kinds of traumas or struggles in the first place. And if we want people to stand with us in and the plights of our peoples, like when these happen, then we need to be able to show empathy and understanding to everyone, and stand with them when these things happen.
Hmm.
So, especially as someone that is, I'm Latino, but again, I'm white passing. I'm a cis hetero male. There's a very special position of privilege I have and occupy that a lot of other people don't. But being able to understand with and empathize with everyone, and being able to find a way to make those struggles, like find a way to internalize them enough to become personal enough to actively fight for and stand by, uh, and not just be silent or be ambivalent towards like these like atrocities when they occur. That's something that I definitely want to do and want to continue to do. Just be an active bystander as opposed to an inactive one.
And well, the thing is that, like, the fact that you mentioned that, you were going towards the librarian route, and obviously, working in libraries is like the perfect way to kind of spread this knowledge, right? Because one, that's where all the books are, and two, I mean, you could like hold events or organize events where either you or someone will come in and actually teach
Yeah.
kids or tell kids like, hey, this is kind of the history and just what's going on.
Yeah, like, that was definitely something I definitely tried to be more conscientious of and aware of. Like, when I did start working as an elementary school librarian, I tried to share a lot of like, I used to have these read aloud sessions with some of the
Okay.
younger kids, and what I would do was I would read um the cultural myths and stories of folklore from around the world to these kids. So I would introduce them to like stories from Chinese mythos, Norse mythology, Greek mythology, stories of Anansi the spider, and like just like these African like myths and legends. Because I wanted to kind of like impart on them like a sense of just understanding and just being able to see other faces as the heroes of these stories besides just their own. I think that's something that well, that was definitely a sentiment that I felt, especially when I was working in film. Like, the biggest complaint a lot of people have is like there's a lack of originality and a lack of like just um, new stories coming out of Hollywood. And I think a part of the problem is it's because we've exhausted how many times we can keep retelling the same story about the white male savior.
Yeah.
So it's like, of course, everything's going to feel boring and rehearsed and contrived because you've already exhausted every possible way you can spin that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
If you really want authenticity or originality, like you definitely need to incorporate more stories, with persons of color, with women, people of different backgrounds and stuff like that into these stories.
Mm.
And, past what we've been doing already, where the only time we see a giant ensemble of black leads is in films regarding like racism and segregation in like the 60s or in the Civil War. Like, no, we need more than just trauma porn. Like, we need being able to see like people like celebrating, black excellence like in contemporary times. We need to see more movies like Crazy Rich Asians where we see,
Yes.
just a collage of different just beautifully talented people like just celebrating being who they are in this space that just, you know, we don't we haven't been able to see for the longest time because we've withheld that. Like we're at a certain point now where where the public is definitely ready to hear those stories. We just need to be willing to share those stories.
Yes.
Um, and the truth is, it's like I'm going into working as a librarian as like a part of a way to kind of just
Yeah.
provide for myself in life and stuff like that. But I still want to work on filmmaking as a passion on the side still with like friends and stuff like that.
Right.
Tell the kinds of stories I would like to tell in the ways
Right.
that I can by amplifying non-white
Yeah.
hetero cis male voices.
Yeah.
Uh,
Diversity, basically.
yeah, basically kind of just like, like actually expanding like the kinds of stories that we hear and incorporating that as not only just something that I can incorporate into just my profession, but just, my life in general. Like, oh God, I'm blanking on this right now. This very famous woman said that it's not enough to be not racist, but we must now be vocally anti-racist. Um,
Mm,
And I think that's something that you have to be able to incorporate, not just in terms of like just like your ability to not only be not perpetuate racist attitudes and beliefs, but also be
yeah.
willing to call that out and fight against that in every facet of your life, like on a professional level, like just whenever you hear like a racist quack or quip by like some coworker, call them out on it. For me as a librarian, I need to monitor like you know the content in a lot of these stories and see if it's still relevant or if they perpetuate any harmful stereotypes. These Dr. Seuss books have got to go from the shelves. I'm sorry. We can't have that kind of stuff in here. We can't let these kids read that. I'm sorry. That's just not right. Yeah. Stuff like that. Like it's just like very little things that we
Right.
can do for ourselves just to kind of
Right.
like find a way to impact that. I definitely think that took a lot more of a personal responsibility for myself. Like when I started working as an elementary school librarian, to be more
Mhm.
diligent about the kinds of stories we share with these kids and like what it is that we want them to get out of it. And I think again that just goes back to the things that I like the most about the movies that I watch, the books that I read. It's like these are stories that amplify voices of those that are often ignored or unheard, and we need to be willing to give space for them to be able to tell those stories and be able to let those be heard by everyone because we need them to more than ever. So
Yep.
for right now, again, kind of trying to go back to what it was I said earlier. It's like just accepting and understanding
Yep.
the role that I have in all of this, and then also doing what I can to actively become part of whatever we can do to make it better.
That's great.
Because I think, yeah, because I think ultimately, like, if we can't do that, then we really can't say that we're becoming better as people or and as individuals. I think
Yeah.
we have to be willing to regard and understand our position in the world along the way with finding our own attitudes of the self. So yeah.
That's great, man. That's beautiful. Love all the things you just said. I wholeheartedly agreed. And I lied. I said that was my last question, but I have one more last question. I promise this is my
Okay.
last question.
No, you can keep asking as many last questions as you want, man. I'm fine.
What's another book that you recommend besides besides that Mark Manson book you're reading? What's another book that you recommend?
Um, so I read books that are just like that feel like a bunch of like different interests for me. Like just they tackle like a bunch of like stuff that I enjoy and appreciate. And a lot of it is also kind of ingrained with like my own like just interests and like stuff that I find interesting.
Sure.
So one of my favorite books from 2 years back that I really loved was a book by Mallory Mira called
Yeah.
The Lady from the Black Lagoon. And that's about the woman that actually created the design and conception of the creature from the Black Lagoon from Universal Monsters, the iconic like a Gillman monster.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was such a great book because it tackles on the obstacles that a woman in the 40s and the 50s has to face. Working in Hollywood, working in animation and in Hollywood film, like basically like trying to create this. It was written mostly as a way to kind of like just reinforce this woman's importance in cinematic history because up until quite recently, she was actually written out of history by the head of the creative department
Oh,
that hired her.
wow.
He was actively trying to discredit her and remove her from any connections to this creature because he wanted to claim the success and the conception of it for his own.
Of course. Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's a timely book because it talks about like just the rampant sexism of that time, and then the author like relates that to the sexism that she faced in her own life.
Mhm.
For her time like working in Hollywood, working as a film producer, and like some of the horrible sexist stuff that has happened like to her around there, as well as also just like in general being a woman of any fashion in this day and age, like the kinds of stuff that they have to put up with. So that's a very good read that I always love to put out there because for anyone that loves film, for anyone that
Yep.
loves history or the history of LA and Hollywood, uh, women in film, it's especially for you. Let's see, another book that I really love. Um, it's another kind of niche book called Violence Girl. It's about like Alicia Amarendez, aka Alice Bag. She is whom I consider the godmother of LA punk rock. She was
Mm,
there at the start of the punk rock scene in the mid 70s in Los Angeles,
mhm.
and kind of like her tales regarding that scene and just, how there was this scene that before it became identified with like these tropes of like, the leather jackets and the studs and like the guys with like the mohawks. Like it was a very, especially in LA, it was a very culturally rich place for women and people of color to kind of like perform and engage in like this new kind of music and art lifestyle that just completely went in defiance with everything else that was going on in this period in time and just you know the history of the city and the music scene in that time, but also again it's a celebration of like what this woman kind of like confronted with and what she went through, especially like as like a Latina woman. Like it a lot of the stuff that she related like in her own childhood, like it spoke to me in a very different way than I think any other kind of artist probably would have. So yeah, Violence Girl by Alice Bagg is another good
Cool.
read if you're interested in anything regarding music or women in history, like especially in LA history.
Cool.
You can already start to see kind of like just where a lot of my general interests are,
Right. Right. And
but I think
these are nonfiction books, right?
yeah, these are nonfiction books.
Okay.
They're I could probably like just label like some of their fiction books for you, but I think as I've gotten older, like I've kind of been more orientated towards reading like a lot of these like books that are based in history and kind of just like these parts of it. Mostly because I think again, this is a part of me kind of trying to expand kind of just
Yeah.
the way that I see the world is also my relation to it. So by
Right.
reading about these stories, about these things that interest me and kind of like elaborating on that a bit more.
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. I mean, it's always good to go with your interests, and it's always good to mix it up too. I always mix it up. I mix it up with
Sorry.
all good, man. I mix up
Yeah.
with both fiction and nonfiction. I mean, I myself have been reading more nonfiction lately, but that's good to hear. That's good because I'll take a look at those books. I'll check out those books, and for anyone who's interesting, I will post the information of those books as well. And but yeah, no, this has been very delightful conversation, very informative, Victor. It's been great having you on. Really appreciate it. And I guess before we do go, where where can people find you? Because I know that you're trying to expand the voice and everything. So where can people find you?
Um, I mean, I'm no advocate or anything like that. Like, I kind of spit out like random opinions here and there when I'm not just like posting just random love for giant monsters and horror movies constantly.
That's fine.
But yeah, my Twitter and Instagram handles are the Kaiju Sleeps. Uh, I just post like a lot of just random interest stuff in addition to like just leftist rants constantly. Um, yeah, if you're interested, that's where I'm at.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. It doesn't matter. You don't have no. Don't have to be any social media influencer, because uh, you know, I believe everyone has a voice. Everyone has their voice. Everyone should be spreading whatever knowledge or voice that they have, and so it doesn't matter. I think
Yeah.
it's still good for people to know. But cool, man. Thanks again, man. I mean, it's been great. I'm sure we'll be back talking again at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. It was great to be here. Thank you, Darren.
Cool. All right. Okay. Thanks. Thank you all for tuning in.